Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 32 of my Pyanodon's playthrough. In this episode, we use the rubber that we made in the last episode, as well as build a stone buffer and start breeding fish. Enjoy. Well, one of them is our science packs. We needed to harvest all the rocks for the stoppers, and we still do, but instead of latex to stopper, it's latex to rubber to stopper. So let's see if there's an efficiency change. So I put both on the same build here so we can compare, where the old recipe was half a latex and some coal turn into a rubber, and the new one, it's half a latex and some other things turn into a rubber. So it doesn't actually save you latex, but it does generate power, as we have seen, even though it's bad power, and it also removes the coal requirement from this. So I would say that this is worthwhile to do, assuming you can put out the rubber. And the other recipes might be a little difficult to implement, but we actually have long-handed inserters now, which really dramatically improve the options we have. Let's just pick up the rubber that's there. So let's make a few of these inserters. Having to make the belts first is a little time consuming, but by having long-handed inserters, it may not seem like it, but they have actually doubled the throughput of our inserters. Because previously, at least on a burner assembler, we were limited to 3 inserters per side. And of course, that is also true with long-handed. However, we can now move the building and do another 3 inserters, which means our total throughput per side is now 6. And this applies to pretty much everything, but the big situation that it applies to is using warehouses and deposits as full flow buffers. Previously, we couldn't quite get enough inserters on here, where each side would only have 6, and that was almost enough, but not quite. But of course, now we can double up. So the warehouse will be good enough for 1 belt. However, the deposit could be good for 2 belts because we can put an absolutely incredible amount of inserters on each side. So we certainly will have some uses for that, but let's actually deal with making these first. This is super janky in here. And well, right out of the gate, we can get rid of this stuff and just use long-handed inserters like a normal player. And splitters too. Yeah, definitely our minibus here is reaching the end of its useful life. Just because the recipes are too complicated and the buildings are too small. We are going to need to have rubber belts on here. And if we are careful about these filters, we can put them on the same belt. And also just use splitters. I totally forgot how much of this jank was actually in here. There's so much. Having the longer poles absolutely helps. And now we need to figure out where to handle this rubber. Well, it's going to be used at belt, so it needs to be inserted no later than that. And we don't know how long this is going to go, so we probably do want to have a caravan outpost here. And look at that, the steam actually ran out. We used it all. So does that mean the steam temperature is going back up? And yeah, it's actually almost at 250 again. So cool, that worked out. And it's not running specifically because we don't have any latex. So it's running at the maximum speed that our build can handle. So I'll put the rubber we do have in there. And there it is, making the rubber pieces, and they are being delivered to every setup. Well, let's take a look at the different recipes for making belts. And it's interesting that they're in different places. So the standard recipe is just in logistics, but you actually have to go to petroleum handling to find this recipe. So let's just normalize it at 1 belt to see the difference. Where the original recipe was half a plate and half of a small parts to make a belt. And now the new one, if we add in the rubber, it's less than half of the small parts and almost half of the iron. So it's actually a huge difference. And one other aspect of this is it's faster. This doesn't really matter too much with burner assemblers, but it goes from 0.25 machines needed to 0.14. So it is absolutely faster. But this means we can essentially change it in place. The number of inserters might be slightly different, but whatever, it's fine. We're backing up on rubber so we can see how the long-handed inserters work, but we also need the special alloy here. And getting this in here is going to be a little tricky. It's the first thing that actually needs it, and honestly it's probably going to be the only thing that needs it. So we'll do a caravan outpost, just straight up delivering it. And there it is. It's highly limited on chromium, so its actual production rate is rather slow. It's going to make the entire factory come to a standstill, but in preparation for our new stone buffer, I kind of want to block off these belts. and the gravel can keep going through. Basically, I want to remind myself which belts have what on them. And specifically, this is going to be a stone buffer, so the factory is going to fill up very rapidly. The other thing we could potentially change are these engines. So let's do that. We'll normalize them to 1 engine each. The old recipe needed 40 parts and some other things, and the new one needs less than half and a little bit of duralumin. And we can turn that duralumin back into the aluminum to see what the numbers are. So you are putting a little bit more in to get this, but I would say overall this is much more efficient as well. So there's the recipe with the inserters as they are without looking at anything or analyzing it. We got 3 of the 4 that we need, and we can actually get the 4th by just going right over like this. And now it's making the better engines. It's still highly limited on inserter speed for the spare parts, but nothing different there. Before the factory completely gets destroyed, let's handle all of this stone. So I mentioned that we can do full flow buffers now, but we are kind of limited to a buffer that has 2 belts of input and 2 belts of output. And I actually want to leave this one connected for now, just to get the belts empty, because that's coming from a different location. But the problem that we have, it's not so much a problem now because we're actively producing things, but the stone has to make it all the way down here, and right now there's no buffer of stone. So if our factory is not producing stone, then this process might stop, and any other process that needs stone might stop. All of our stone is produced as a byproduct. We're not actually mining stone for stone anymore. And the way we can get around this is by having a stone buffer to hold on to stone and only get rid of it when the buffer starts getting full. We didn't do this in the past because we didn't have loaders, and doing it at speed would have just been difficult. But we're at the point where we can do that now, and this seems like a good enough spot for it. So let's build a buffer. It's kind of funny that it's just going to be placed right in here, but it will perform its function. And right now we have stone belts going all over the place to try to give the correct priority to everything. But that will no longer be required. The priority will just come from the buffer warehouse, or in this case, deposit itself. So the way that we get a bunch of inserters on here is, well, first we want the power poles, and they don't quite reach all the way, but we can put one in the middle, where we can get 4 inserters there, and let's just connect it to, and 4 inserters there, and then another 4 inserters, and another 4 inserters. This gives us 16, which is more than enough to max out the belt. And to make it work, the belt just needs to do a loop to get access to both sides. So we just need to make sure that the only things coming in here are actually stone. So we'll see if this works. In goes the full belt of stone, and the deposit rapidly fills up. We probably do want to have indicator lights for this. That said, I usually don't fill these things up all the way. So let's just have 2 lights here that are reading the bad conditions. One bad condition can be if stone is essentially 0, and let's say below 100 is pretty bad. And the other one is if it's super full. And what would count as full? Well, I guess it depends on what we decide to empty it at. Let's go with 10,000. So if it's more than, how about 20,000, we'll consider that also a problem. And we're almost certainly going to put these belts right back, but I want to kind of clean things up a bit so we can analyze the logic of what's happening here. Because now that we have splitters, we can just send it to where it needs to go, and we don't have to have all this crazy logic in here. And we might as well have the stone just kind of bypass the factory rather than go down the middle of it like it has been. Because we did that for logic reasons with priority, we don't need to do that anymore. Unfortunately though, doing this is going to cause the flora to take a different direction as well. It's kind of amazing that making one change, like the direction of the belt, and suddenly all these things are broken. And it looks like we're actually filling up on jerky, and to an extent it's kind of overloading a little bit, but I think it's good to leave for now. Looks like these belts have mostly cleared out, which means this long byproduct belt is no longer required, and this was a pretty messy one because it was going through all of this. And this is actually a supply belt of stone, so it's supposed to be there. It's supposed to be full, though, and that's kind of why we're doing this, is because the belts don't fill up properly. So we had all of this craziness that was sorting and directing the stone, which we do not need anymore. It was so bad. This stone belt had its tendrils in just about every part of our factory. It was quite the mess. It worked, but it was messy. So it's great to pull this out and actually replace it with something more reliable. Okay, well if any junk makes it to the end of here that's not supposed to be on here, we'll definitely want to pull it off. And we haven't actually crushed stone bricks in a long time. Since these belts are being changed, let's leave the setup here, but not actually hook up the belt, because it may never run ever again. So we do need to control the dump, because we only want to get rid of the stone if we have too much. And the way we can control that is with what happens after it goes through this splitter to be sent along the factory. So if we just shut this down here, and since the warehouse is pretty close, let's just send the wire through where it goes in, pulling off the number, and let's say stone has to be more than 10,000. If it is, they can turn on and that will cause the stone dumping to occur. Okay, now we need to create our 2 belts of output out of this, and it basically works the same way. Just looks a little bit different because it's output inserters. 8 on each level. Going towards the center. And then straight down, and we've got our 2 belts. And isn't that a thing of beauty? So yeah, the long-headed inserters actually have a 2-pronged usefulness. One of them is just a massive throughput of insertion speed, and the other is the fact that they reach long distances. In comes the stone. Ideally, it will be sent to the right first. That's one belt. They basically both output all of the time. And this belt goes to where it needs to. It's going to be the very long belt that sends stone all over the factory to where it needs to go. And look at that. The avalanche of stone has arrived. So much cleaner in here, and in fact I want to straighten this belt out just because I can. So much better. It was awful in there for the longest time. So this stone belt will come through here, and it's partially populated now, but if we do belt visualizer, we can chase it down to see that it does go to everywhere that it needs to. And now looking at stone, the number is less than 10,000 in here, so the stone dumps have stopped, and instead it is just sending stone to where it needs to. So we'll always have a small buffer of stone to run various processes. Okay, it's time for some new research. And the main thing we want to go towards next is assembly 2, which will give us the automated factory. But to get here, we're actually going to need to make some fish oil. And as you would imagine, fish oil comes from fish. So we can do the water animals stage 1, which will give us the ability to render fish. It gives us things we're familiar with, but there's some new things in here. We get bones and skin. Neither of them decay into anything, but the important thing we're here for is the fish oil. This recipe alone means we would need to go pick up fish. So instead, let's do some research that will allow us to breed the fish. We can do microbiology here, which unlocks the phytoplankton farm, which has a bunch of random stuff in it. Highly controlled environment to grow phytoplankton. And there's a couple of interesting recipes here. The direct way of growing the phytoplankton is to just mix in tin grade 1 with some water, and you'll get phytoplankton. And it's interesting that it doesn't really state it here, but I guess it kind of hints it when it says max temperature, that this is actually a fluid, the phytoplankton is. Also, you can make it from jerky. I suppose that's a way of getting rid of jerky, but this seems like a pretty bad recipe because you could just turn the jerky into biomass, so I imagine this is probably a pie hard mode recipe. And we can make Zognobacteria, which is another liquid, with a very interesting combination of resources: lamp, wood, petri dishes, and air. And also we have the BioCrud reprocessing recipe that I mentioned earlier. It is an interesting one where you put in the BioCrud and biomass, as well as steam and phytoplankton, and then you will turn it into a whole bunch of random stuff. So we'll have to take a look at that later. It's kind of tricky because a lot of those things have decay attached to them, so they're all just going to go bad. But nonetheless, we could actually just kind of pick them up and move them around the factory manually. It's kind of a weird recipe. It definitely gets rid of the BioCrud, which is nice, but it also creates a lot of junk. So when we do that, now we have fish stage 1, which of course unlocks the fish farm, which requires a bunch of stuff, but it's interesting that it takes pumps, but I guess fish tanks have pumps, so makes sense. It's like an aquarium, but on an industrial scale, and it's very heavy on glass. 140 glass for one building is a lot. And the fish have an interesting life cycle as compared to the vrox. They are very circular. So it starts with fish, phytoplankton, and saline water, and then you will get fish eggs and wastewater. And then you take those fish eggs with more saline water, oxygen, biomass, lamps, and then you will get fish and more wastewater. So the two processes go into each other, but they are a net positive. And of course, the building also requires fish as modules. The main thing to note here is that fish eggs do decay. It's a 30-minute decay time, so it's really not that bad, but nonetheless, we probably want some kind of logic so it's just not decaying all of the time, especially considering it does decay into biocrud. And also interesting is that this is the first use of biomass for our factory, besides just getting rid of it, and also lamps, that we're going to start seeing different processes require lamps. And there's a recipe here for getting rid of the wastewater, but this is totally another Py hard mode recipe because you could just dump the wastewater. You don't need to do all of this, and certainly it is a low value byproduct, so I am fine with dumping it. The main thing I look at when it comes to reprocessing recipes is what do you get out of it? And we get water from this, which we could just pump normally. So there's no reason to do this process at all. If we could actually get something useful out of the wastewater, sure, but right now we can't. And there we go. We'll let that research. It'll probably go pretty fast. One thing I noticed is that our mining productivities do actually apply to the geothermal plant. They apply to basically anything that mines, but the geothermal plant is on there. Coming down here, it absolutely does say productivity plus 20%. So what does that actually do to the recipe? Well, if we come in here, it's based on the pre-research numbers, but we can just come in and say 1 again and hit enter, and it will now recalculate for the additional productivity. So it's a good thing we put 2 heat exchangers in there because now we actually need them. And currently we have 9 steam engines on each build, but if we put a 10th one in there, it will be balanced. So let's do that real quick. Looking at research here, it seems to be going pretty well. Nothing to complain about. I did put the rubber in here. We don't need to have latex or coal delivered anymore. So if we just switch this to rubber, now it can go in, and this will just take the rubber and turn it into stoppers. It's a small benefit, but optional if you want to. Looking at the future, we're actually not very far away from stage 2 of rocks. In fact, we could research them now if we wanted to. And since we're using the rocks for more than just science, we probably will want to expand production. But for now, we can just dump the rubber in here, and not that it matters, but we can get rid of that there. So that was an upgrade in place. That did save us a little bit of coal. And we're looking pretty good on jerky now. So we're now running just to make the formic acid again. Well, it doesn't really matter where we put the engine, but I kind of want it to at least look clean. So if we do that, it now has 10. And there we go. All setups upgraded. Okay, research is done. We're going to need a lot of glass, so we might as well let this thing start going. In fact, I kind of want to put a steel chest there. I have the feeling it's going to be a lot of glass. Since they go into each other, we need to use the matrix solver. And it did pick the upgraded farm. And of course, we haven't picked a fish turd yet, so we don't want that. And we also need to remember to put all of the fish in it. And it's interesting that we're actually making us go down here and pick out the fish rather than having it pre-selected. I wonder if it's just a weird fish oddity. But there it is. It holds, strangely enough, 7 of them. So then the phytoplankton farms need the tin, and I'm guessing that is a perfectly acceptable amount of tin. We're probably just going to send it by caravan. We make 6.66 per second, so we certainly would have enough. Fish are quite slow to make, but also we just don't need that much fish oil. Oh, probably something like this to get started. It is mostly a 1-to-1 ratio between the phytoplankton farms and the fish farms making the eggs. Looking at the gearbox, it needs 20 fish oil per gearbox. So this would make 1 every about 3 seconds, which seems fine. So we have a shopping list here. Now that we have a use for biomass, we want to try to save it if possible. And these buildings are already here, so we just have to deal with what we've got. At least we have medium power poles now. So there is a belt back here, putting the biomass in. Now we're building up biomass. We certainly could create it on site for this setup. Probably the best way is from wood and logs. They're just very dense. but I'm guessing we're probably going to get enough biomass that we don't need to do that, but we'll see. Also, these fish farms require 50 circuit boards each, so if your production is lacking, you'll know now, but I think we're pretty good here. We're also going to need some fish. This is the last occurring alien life that we are about to utilize here. And we have kind of already gone through here before, looking for fish for turbines. And I suppose if you wanted to build a bunch of turbines, once you have automated fish, you'll be able to do that. But by this point, the turbines are a rather small power output, so this doesn't really help you at all. And there we go, 200 seems good. It just occurred to me that this is going to be our first build that actually has long-handed inserters. And having the medium power poles will be nice too, but oh boy, long-handed inserters. Imagine the possibilities. We're just going to need to wait up on getting biomass, but even in the time of just building these buildings, we've actually got quite a bit. So where do we want to do this? Well, it doesn't really matter for the most part, because a lot of this is going to come on Caravan, but what does matter is where the slaughtering happens. Right now we're just slaughtering things right near where the creature's made, but eventually we're going to have a centralized slaughtering area. But nonetheless, keeping it around where the rocks are is probably smart. And oxygen is gone. Oh, did pipe just not get lined up? Looks like it. I was trying to find where the oxygen pipe was. No wonder our power usage has been pretty mild right now. I mean, all things considered mild. It was still reasonably high considering no electrolyzers are going. But we need to fix that. Okay, well, those were never connected. Now they are. But it's holding out. We need to make the eggs, and here's the fish farm. It's a pretty cool building, and it's got lots of inputs and outputs on it. You can rotate it. The outputs do actually flow, so that's worth mentioning, that the inputs have to be an in arrow for both sides, but the actual wastewater can go straight through the buildings. And then with the next recipe, the inputs change a little, but it'll still work. And do we just do a direct insertion? It would make the setup bigger, but it's kind of asking for it because that's what the ratios want. But there's the phytoplankton farm. It kind of looks like a clarifier from Angel Bob's. So that handles one side. Now we need to do the other. But with our miraculous long-handed inserters, we can pick up from the far side. And this machine might have some decay, and we'll just deal with that. We'll put everything on the one belt. And there we go. That will do the sides. It's so much cleaner, isn't it? We're probably going to want to put everything down here and see it operate in full rather than step by step. So the next stage isn't all that much different than this one. They're both still picking up from this part of the belt, but now they actually need to drop off on the far side. So if we put a balancer in here and say to the left, instead of the fish goes the eggs, that should get all the sides correct. And then additionally on the back, we need to make sure we pull off the resources from that belt as well. It's actually kind of complicated. It's funny that having long-handed inserters gives us all of these options, and yet things still stay complicated for some reason. I wonder why. What's the common element here? It can't be the YouTuber. It's got to be something else. And this is ending up being a lot longer than I was expecting it to be, but I don't think it's going to block anything, so it should be fine. So that's 12, 16, and that's 20. This is actually a pretty slow process that despite all of these fish farms, that it really only consumes a tiny amount of resources. Fish in the beginning are very slow. And then we need to do a loop back to get to the very start of this to put the fish in. Looks like we are backing up on stone here. Why is that? Oh, there's some really bad mixing going on in there. Something was set wrong. Looks like I put this in the wrong spot. So much junk. Good thing this chest was here to pick up things that weren't supposed to be here. We're going to need some junk inserters in here. And interesting that the long-hand inserter actually has 3 filters that you can use. But we have a lot of belts we need to clear out. Hopefully I fixed it. Anyway, what were we doing? Oh yeah, coming up here to get some belts. Because we need fish for this process to run, we've got to have a loop. And we'll output to the left because we're probably going to do the slaughtering somewhere around here. But in go the fish that we have. Wow, it's actually kind of a lot of buildings. They're pretty big. And whoops. It's a little weird when they are both the ingredient and the module. And the wastewater, when it gets to this point, can just go down a sinkhole. Still working through the backup, but at least nothing is missorted anymore. Okay, there's the oxygen. Oh no, we have no radar. Gotta fix that. And these longer power poles only make this mildly less inconvenient. But we don't have the big power poles yet, so this is what we gotta do. And then the water goes into the phytoplankton, and finally in goes the saline water. So now we're just waiting on the solids. And because we need several different resources, instead of sending 3 caravans, we can do a single combined one. And I've been hinting about it before, but I suppose it's time for the spreadsheet. He has 30 slots, so how many slots are taken up by what item? Because we want him to carry not necessarily an equal amount of items, but an equal number of seconds of items. I don't have too much experience recording desktop windows, but what we need to do is look at the number of items we need and basically record them. And I've created a spreadsheet to calculate this. The information we need to enter is green. So first we need to look at the different items we need to bring in: lamps, biomass, and tin. And then how many of them do we need per second? 0.37 lamps, 1.24 biomass, and 0.25 tin. And to be clear, you don't actually have to do this. For your caravans, you can just have 3 separate caravans coming here and bringing resources, but I kind of like the idea of one caravan to rule them all, basically. And then we also need to put in the stack size of each item, because really it doesn't matter how many items per second we need to know how many stacks we need. So lamp stack in 50, I think tin was 100. What's biomass? 100. And I'll remove those so it looks nice and clean. So then with that information, it finds out how many stacks per minute of each item do we need. And then this is the total number of stacks per minute that the build needs. And the caravan is going to have a capacity of 30. And this is the percent of the caravan's load that needs to be taken up by this item. So then here's the ideal number of stacks it would get. But we're going to operate on full stacks, so it rounds them to the nearest stack size. And this percent right here just shows how far off of ideal that it is. And if we wanted to adjust the stack size, we could there. And then at the end, it gives us the information we need. Not only does it tell us the number of stacks, but also the total number of items, because that's what we need to type into the caravan. And also, it will say how many minutes it will take for each item to be empty. So the limiting factor of all of this would be the tin, because it would run out in 20 minutes. And I have a second tool here to calculate how long the route will take. It's certainly going to take less than 20 minutes, but it's part of the calculation, so how about let's do it? And he doesn't need to wait, because the shortest time to go empty was the tin. So after it empties out its cargo, it will also sit there and keep emptying tin until tin is empty, and then it will do its run. So to figure out how much time this route's going to take, we need to enter the stops. And we did upgrade them so we can put the new number in there. And we just go down the coordinates of the stops. And then the last stop has to be the first one again. So with the speed of kilometers an hour, we figure out how many meters per second it is. And then it just calculates the distance between the 2 coordinates. And then how much time it would take. And we have the total distance and the total time, or 176 seconds. So coming back here, it inputs that number. So almost 3 minutes, or we would need 0.15 caravans for the route. So I figured it would be kind of cool to show that spreadsheet there. It's entirely unnecessary for caravans, but I don't know, I was having fun. Anyway, with that calculation, we know that it's going to take the caravan about 3 minutes to do its route, and these numbers should be pretty good, although there is going to be a buffer that it's going to have to fill up, so it's not going to be perfect, but it should be close. And for this to work, we need to have filters on all of the slots, and that's what it looks like visually. So will this work? Let's find out. And go. I've got a timer going so we can see how long it takes him to do the route. Of course, it's going to be longer than our 2.9 minute estimate, because it doesn't go in a straight line, and it does take a little bit of time to do loading and unloading and things. But the purpose of the tool is to create an estimate, not to be super duper exact, just to see, do we need 1 caravan? Do we need 5? that kind of thing. After making the tool and testing it out, I figured out that for the most part, you really only need one caravan, even for these multi-stop deliveries. It's really only if you use them when you really should have used like a train or something that you find out that you need a ton of them, but this will reduce the number of caravans that we have, and it also avoids having to use interrupts. And I've got some ideas for some interrupt-based caravans that we can do, but we're not quite there yet. Come on, don't get stuck. I want my data to be accurate. Alright, he runs up and picks up the lamps, and I guess that's what 500 looks like, so I got the stack sizes wrong there. Luckily it doesn't matter, because the caravan goes by numbers and not stack sizes. And so much coke. This one is pretty far out here, but there we go. He's got a full load now, and he's going back. Let's fix those filters real quick. There we go. So I'm guessing the total time he's going to take is going to be about 10 or 20% longer than the estimate, and definitely is, because we're right at 3 minutes now, but it's pretty close. And stop. That was about 3 minutes and 10 seconds, and that would have been about 190 seconds, and the estimate was 176, so it was reasonably close. But yeah, we're probably going to want to force him to do a few runs, because we're going to have a big buffer that we're going to have to fill up, and the actual size of the buffer is different than our regular consumption. In goes the tin, which is now making the phytoplankton, and it got shot in. It's a liquid, so it's kind of unsatisfying, but it's in there. And then the lights and the biomass go down. Okay, we're loaded up with enough to see this process work. It looks like we're only going to be able to do the first two. That's all we have the fish for, and they're going. It is an 80-second craft, and I realized we didn't put any control logic in here for turning these on and off. And the thing that goes bad is the eggs, so we probably want to turn the fish farms themselves on and off. Well, we're going to need a buffer chest for this, which we can do right there, and we'll just send the wire up. It doesn't need to go across the factory on radars. And there we go, we're starting to get fish eggs. It goes through our little side switcher here. Anyway, our control signal can just go to the fish farms directly, and we'll enable and disable them. And let's say if fish is under 50 or one stack, it'll turn on, and of course they all want to. Despite the fact that we are able to fully seed all of these fish farms, it still takes a while to get going just because all of the belts need to be filled up too. And there we go. Now we've got fish, and it's really cool that there's lots of different graphics for them. So they are both put on the correct side of the belt, and then they are going to go all the way around the loop. And I guess we do need to have a filter here for the fish, because any biocrud we have will also make it in there, and we're not making enough biocrud for it to matter to the point to where we need to transport it places, so we'll just have collection chests for it. And in come the eggs, and out go the fish, and that's pretty neat to see. This is a fully automated process now. It's going to take a while for all of the fish to build up and everything, but it eventually will. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to use the fish oil to start making automated factories. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.